Welcome to Syntax. Today we have a show for you on React Native. It's actually not something we've talked about a whole lot. We talk about React quite a bit on this podcast, but we are usually talking about it in regards to building web apps and going straight to the DOM. So React Native is this whole other part of the React world where, quite honestly, I think a lot of your skill set would apply to. So we've got Robin Heinze on. She's a director of engineering at Infinite Red, which is a React Native consulting company. And she's also the co-host or host of the React Native Radio podcast. So we're doing a little switchy switch little podcast here.
Crossover edition.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, crossover. Love it.
So we will also be coming on the React Native Radio as well, maybe to talk a little bit more about web dev. But welcome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really exciting to talk React Native. I did a course on React Native a while ago and have since completely fallen out of that sphere. So I have a lot of questions for you.
Well, I hopefully have a lot of answers.
Yeah. And you know who else has answers? Sentry has answers for bugs within your iOS and Android apps. That's right. Sentry works with iOS and Android. Head on over to sentry.io/syntax, sign up and get 2 months for free. Sentry presents this podcast. So, Robin, welcome to the show. Do you want to, first and foremost, because I think we could assume that there is a handful of people listening who don't know the difference between something like React Native and something like a webview, like a Cordova type of platform. Yeah. Do you maybe want to give a quick introduction to React Native and how it's different than just a typical loading up a web view?
It's a good question, and it's a really common misunderstanding of what React Native is. So first and foremost, React Native is native. That's kind of a really common saying you'll hear, because what it's doing is it's actually taking JavaScript and using it to render native views. So what you're seeing in your app is like UI views. It's like actual native, like what you'd write in Swift or Kotlin. It's just being kind of like generated magically for you based on the JavaScript that you write. So it's a very native feeling experience, and pretty much anything you can do in native, you can do in React Native.
Nice.
You just have to build the right layer in between.
Yeah, I remember when it first came out, and you can tell me if this is still the case, but it's your business logic, looping over things, fetching data, all of that stuff happens in JavaScript on a separate thread. But the actual UI layer, which is the things that you touch and the things that you see, that is not running. Like there's no divs or anything like that in regards to there. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. What you're actually like touching and swiping and moving, that's all native components. That's
okay.
Yeah.
And what's the benefit of using React Native over something like either somebody going straight direct and writing like an iOS app and an Android app, or what other else the alternatives are?
I mean, an iOS engineer or a Android engineer would probably tell you that there is none. But we make really the benefit that you get is from a business perspective. You can write the same app in half the time. And when you're iterating on features down the line and maintaining the app, you're doing so with fewer people and less time, and with the ability to share things like components or business logic or whatever between your mobile apps and your web apps. So it just introduces this whole ability to share and save time and do things a lot more efficiently without sacrificing the native look and feel, because like what you're getting is ultimately native.
Yeah. So I think one of the big things that people always hunt for is like a write once, deploy everywhere kind of thing. Is that a total fiction? I know, when you get into it, you do end up going down paths of Android specific components and React specific components. Is there any hope to the write once, deploy everywhere dream?
When you're talking like a full-fledged, like mature production app, of course it's not going to be 100% write once, deploy anywhere, but it's it's impressively close in our experience. Like we've built plenty of iOS and Android, and then also web apps for big companies. And I'd say like we usually achieve like 85-90% completely shared application.
Wow.
That's
Like
a lot. Yeah.
unless you're doing something really crazy complex, you're going to be able to share a ton of what you're writing. So it's not 100% write once deploy anywhere, but it's close enough that it's and really anything is better than zero, right? Like anything is better than write twice.
Yeah, right. Seriously.
Like,
yeah.
So, I mean, even if we were getting like 25-30%, like that would be better than zero. And in our experience, it's usually way higher than that. So,
And what are some apps that people might not know are React Native that are things that are pretty commonly used?
oh, there's some that we've worked on that we can't talk about, but some that you have probably used that we can talk about and love to talk about. Mercari is one. So if you've used Mercari, it's like a Facebook marketplace type of buy from random people. But it's really big in the US. It's even bigger in Japan. That's a fully React Native app. And they actually went from fully native and did a whole React Native rewrite, which we helped them with, and actually saw quite a few like performance gains. And they had a 5-star rating. So it was a big deal that they chose to do a rewrite. And they've managed to maintain that. But yeah, Mercari is one. I'm trying to think who I can talk about that we know of. I think, so I don't know if you know of Evan Bacon. He works for Expo, which is a React Native sort of like tooling service. But he actually like pulled down a bunch of apps from the store and just like inspected their binaries to see what packages were installed, to see who is using Expo and React Native. And there's a ton.
Really?
It's like 75% of the top apps in the App Store or something are using React Native or Expo in some fashion.
And what about like Twitter and Facebook? Because I know if you inspect Element on twitter.com, there's a lot of random classes and lots of divs. And the reasoning behind that, same with Facebook, is we thought, oh yeah, they're using React Native as well, or were at some point.
I know Twitter Lite was actually the reason that React Native for Web was created. So if you're not familiar, React Native for Web is it's a package that they built so that you can use the React Native like primitives, view, image, all those, to write for web. So it's a layer in between React Native and then the DOM. So you feel like you're writing React Native code, you're importing from React Native, but it's rendering to the DOM. And you say, well, why would you do that if you just use React.js? Well, it's partly because it lets you write for all 3 platforms. It introduces that 3-platform system, but also because, and this is where React strict DOM, which is coming down the pike, actually comes in. React Native for Web, it sort of limits the subset of the DOM that you can use. So you're not just like able to call any like HTML tag willy-nilly, like, oh, add in a marquee or all those things that we don't want people to be using. It really sort of defines the set of elements that you can use, which was their reasoning for doing it. But now that it exists, like we use it all the time to be able to write an app and have it run on web, iOS, and Android.
Yeah, we had Nate from Tamagui on, and that was my first real introduction to, oh wait, React Native Web isn't weird or scary. It's actually a pretty cool platform for even that kind of dream that we were talking about, the write once, deploy everywhere. I think that's like the closest we can get. It's a pretty cool thing. You had mentioned Expo a bit ago. Expo seems to be one of those things that people feel like or is required. I'm confused. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about what Expo is, and is it something that you need to work in React Native, or in these days is it a must have?
I mean, it's technically not a must have, but we consider it a must have just because it improves the developer experience that much. So what Expo is a suite of tools. It's a lot of different things. But for starters, it's kind of like it's a layer on top of React Native that just gives you a lot of niceties. and sort of papers over some of React Native's rough edges and gives you a much more enjoyable experience for developing. It also, they have an entire suite of libraries that they have built and are like sort of Expo blessed kind of things like camera and maps and like all the different like third-party libraries that don't come with React Native core. Instead of sort of picking a library from the community, which may or may not be good or maintained or whatever, they have their own like very well maintained, well documented packages, and you can actually use those independently if you're not actually using the primary Expo SDK.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I found that the Expo experience was nice being able. So, Wes, if you haven't used it, one of the cool things you can do is you download the Expo app onto your phone, and then you scan a QR code, and then it loads up your native app on your device without having to actually, like, connect to it via cable or do any of that wonkiness or install it in any specific way. It just makes debugging, especially getting up and running really early or really quick. So you said you do use it on most to all projects?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a couple of years ago, we sort of made the switch and started using Expo on all of our projects. Expo, nice. It's kind of had an evolution. There's still people, even in the React Native world, that don't totally understand what Expo has become, because what it used to be was basically a tool that made it easy to build like a one-off like POC or starter app or something.
Yeah.
It had very limited capabilities when it came to native libraries and extra stuff. And so people felt like, oh, this is just like a tool for novices or something that you wouldn't actually use for a serious app. And it still kind of has that reputation, even though it's evolved a lot beyond what it was in its early days. And it has all these systems now for, they call it continuous native generation, CNG, which means that the iOS and Android directories, which are the actual like native apps that run on your devices, are generated like on demand, basically. Based on what you can, like, you have this whole big configuration file and you can define all the different things that you want in your native configuration, then it'll generate it on the fly.
Wow.
Which is a change from the early days where you just had that Expo app, like you mentioned, and like that was a very static set of native packages and you couldn't change it. But now you have full control over what native packages are installed and how everything's configured. So you can do those really complex, mature production level applications using Expo the whole way along.
Yeah, this site in the docs really make this look a lot more mature. I mean, it always looked good when it came out. The docs look good, but this looks like a lot different than what I remember in a very positive way.
Yeah, it's come a long way. And like you said, Expo is really great for making it easy to do builds, even if you don't have a full native environment on your machine.
Yeah, how does that work? Like, do you need a Mac to build an iOS app?
So with Expo, you don't. I mean, everyone on our team does because but
Macs
you
are
don't.
The best,
You don't have to, because of the way they first of all, they have this whole EAS, which is Expo Application Services, but it's a service where they do a bunch of builds on the cloud, and then you can basically scan a QR code with your phone to download a development build. So a build pointing to a development server that's live. So you can do your native development or your local development on a device that's pointing to a server running in the cloud. And you don't need it actually running on your machine. It's wild.
Okay. Is that what like Google's IDX came out a couple of months ago, and they're like, we have native iOS previews, and I was like, how are they doing that? Is that what they're using? Do you know?
I don't know specifically, but it wouldn't surprise me.
It's probably what it is. They don't have a farm of iOS devices.
No, they don't
just
have
with
a farm.
Cameras pointed at them. Yeah. Oh man. Okay, so I'm trying to understand and just like put out the picture for anyone listening and say, all right, I'm a JavaScript developer. I'd love to build a native application, right? So we talked about there's packages that are sort of bridges to the native API. So you want to use native mapping. You can still control it with your JavaScript, but whatnot. I'm thinking about like, all right, I started up. I got Expo. one of the first things I do when I'm building an app on the web is I have a router, right? Like it's different endpoints because I have. Is that an idea in React Native? Is there a URL that changes when you go from tab to tab?
So that's actually not an easy question to answer because the answer used to be no.
Okay.
We use a library called React Navigation, and it's not it's not a URL. It's just like sort of like screens layered on top of each other. So you'll have what are called stacks. So you'll have, say you have like tabs at the bottom. Like each tab will be like a stack. So if you have like your profile tab, you go to the profile stack, and then there's like maybe screens behind that, like edit and create and a bunch of related screens in that stack. And you kind of just like put screens onto the stack or take them off to go back. And it's a very like physical analogy, but it was not URL based until recently. Expo, specifically a guy named Evan Bacon at Expo has been really involved in this. He's been on our show a couple times, but he's come up with this package called Expo Router, which is actually built on top of React Navigation, but it adds a URL-based navigation system, which means that it maps one-to-one with a web application if you're building them at the same time. So you can use a URL and go to it on your website, and it will, if you have your app installed and you've set up all of the deep linking configuration that you need, it will go into your app to that page, to that record with whatever like query string stuff you've added based on the URL, and it will actually navigate based on URL. And it's still pretty new. I've tried it out a couple times. It's pretty cool, but it's still like kind of in that beta feeling phase.
Okay. How do native apps normally, if you're not using like a URL, like that's all I know in my life, how do native apps normally say, oh, I need to bring you to this screen?
You literally have like a listener. So you'll deep link into the app, and there'll be a listener that figures out what URL was called, and then you have some sort of long nested configuration that says like, okay, if this is the URL, parse that, get the thing, and then like navigate to this screen with this parameter. Like it's all very manual what's going on behind the scenes.
And does that use something called deep links? Is that related here? Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard the word deep links. That's as far as
generally
I've gotten.
what deep linking means.
Okay.
Is opening a native app and then going several screens inside.
And if I have a bunch of React hooks that I've written and maybe a couple React packages that have NPM installed, which ones of those am I able to use? Is anything that touches the DOM is kind of offside? You're not allowed to use it, but anything that's just logic in terms of like state and effects and all that good stuff?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Anything that's not like rendering UI components that would be using the DOM is totally fair game, because I mean the React layer is the same. So like we use all the same hooks, like use state, use effect, all those. Yeah, the UI is kind of where it diverges the most.
Well, let's talk about that then. So you want to make a UI, and that's the point where you diverge from, I'm writing JavaScript, I'm comfortable with it. Now I need to make a button. I need to make a layout. I need to put this image in a specific thing. And that's when you sort of realize, oh, these are not DOM nodes. These are native nodes. Like, right, that's the whole point. So like, what do you do? Like, can you use CSS?
So React Native does not use CSS at all. It actually uses its own UI engine. It's called Yoga, but ultimately it's sort of a variation of CSS Flexbox. It's not quite the same as CSS Flex, but it's like based on Flex. And it's just every component is passed a style object. Nothing is cascading, which I love.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of cascading anything. So it's all very declarative. Like this component gets this style, nothing's inherited. And yeah, it would be familiar to you if you know CSS, but it's slightly different.
Yeah, there's enough little weird things. But like if you're good at Flexbox, you'll be good at laying
you'll
out.
You'll be right at home.
Yeah, I think one of the weirder things is that I think the default flex direction is
yeah.
column instead of row. Yeah.
That's true, which makes
Yeah.
sense if you're talking about, like, because you're talking about mobile,
Mhm.
which is a vertical screen, right? So it makes sense that you would default to having things go into a column. And I was never truly a web developer before I started React Native. I was a back-end developer. And so it's just normal to me that column is the default.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's all you know. So if you're writing styles for this type of thing, you're either writing yoga directly, or do React Native Web and Tamagui sit on top of yoga? Like, do they translate to either CSS or yoga?
I don't 100% know, but React Native for web, yeah, you use React Native styles, and I'm guessing it translates to CSS.
Oh, the CSS
Yeah.
equivalent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but
that
but
makes
we use React Native styles, which for consistency. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you have a React Native app and you're doing sort of just normal styling on it, how does that work between Android and iOS? Do the platforms take over a little bit of the styling themselves?
The platforms basically do what you tell them. You do have to sometimes take into account different UI patterns on the platforms. I mean, like, if you want to make your two apps exactly the same, you can absolutely do that. I mean, that would be what would happen by default if you just made an app without separating the two. But there are UI patterns that Android users and iOS users expect from their apps.
Yeah.
Like things like Android, the headers are usually left justified instead of centered, and things like that, like where buttons are placed. Like, there's slight differences like that. And if you want to be really pure about adhering to those platform differences, yeah, you're going to have some conditionals in place, because the styles are just going to be, they're going to do what you tell them to do. There's not anything that Android's going to do differently automatically.
Interesting.
And did I hear that React Native was introducing their own JavaScript engine, or they had built their own JavaScript engine? Like, it's not, or maybe it was. Was it Safari at one point, like the JavaScript core?
It was JavaScript core, and yeah, it was on iOS. It was the Safari engine, I believe. But yes, they wrote their own engine. It's called Hermes.
Okay.
So the JavaScript that you're running in React Native does not match what you would run in like Chrome, which was actually a problem for a while, because they had the debugger option that they had would run in Chrome, and they had all these issues where people would have bugs happening in their app that would not reproduce in the debugger because it was running a completely different JavaScript engine.
Yeah.
And the React Native JavaScript engine had fewer features than the Chrome engine. And so they don't really use the Chrome debugger anymore for that reason, but they built their own JavaScript engine called Hermes, which is really fast and really awesome.
Man, it's wild if you think about that. There are so many different JavaScript engines out there.
Oh, I know.
And like, does it have full support for JavaScript? Like, can you use async await? Like, does it have everything in it, or do you have to wait for things to be added?
Yeah, it's pretty modern. We got async await when everyone else did, pretty much.
So does this relate at all to the new architecture of React Native? Is that a related discussion?
I mean, everything is related to the new architecture, so yes.
Okay.
The new architecture is, until recently, if you'd asked any given React Native developer, probably couldn't have told you the same answer. They've been working hard to really define what it is. Ultimately, it's a change to the way that the JavaScript code bridges to the native code. Specifically, there was a thing called the bridge, which asynchronously sent messages from JavaScript to native and vice versa. And so there was this little bit of lag for especially for things like really long lists with a lot of images, and there was just this little bit of lag that put an upper ceiling on performance.
Okay.
for React Native. And they have removed that entirely and come up with this thing called, I think it's JSI, JavaScript interface, which lets C++ actually hold a JavaScript object in memory. So it can I'm not an expert on the new architecture by any means, but that's sort of like the crux of the change. And it opens the door for a lot of new performant changes, like using all the React 18 features like suspense and stuff wouldn't have been possible with the old architecture. And the new architecture kind of opens the door to a lot of that stuff.
I sincerely appreciate that overview because I've been looking to try to understand this new architecture business for a little while. You go to the new architecture working group and oh man, it's a total mess. You go to let me go to announcements or deep dive or documentation. They all take you to just a GitHub discussion where who knows what. It's just people like posting random things.
This has been several years of normal people like ourselves trying to understand what Meta is doing over there.
Yeah,
and we know it's going to be good, but it's been a struggle.
We hear that a lot from people that come on the show where they're either doing WASM or they're doing something at a service worker or they're doing like a Electron desktop. There's like this like chasm that you have to cross from native to JavaScript. And every single time that you do that, there's a little bit of a price to pay.
Yeah.
And like obviously the benefit of that is you can use JavaScript. So that's interesting that they've totally fixed that.
Yeah. They've kind of married those two a lot more. So we're excited for that to land. It's finally kind of creeping in. They're to the point where most of the third-party libraries that are used by a lot of people are new architecture ready, basically.
Okay.
Because native libraries need to do a lot of changes because of the new architecture being about like how the JavaScript and the native communicate. Most packages that have native components like your camera and your, things like that have native components need a lot of updates. And so most of those libraries are ready now.
That's sick. And that kind of leads nicely into a question I was going to have about, like, if something like that big change happens, is that going to break a lot of older React Native apps, or do they see that as just being like a drop-in and fingers crossed just works?
They have done a lot of work to make the transition as painless as possible. Like, they built in compatibility for new and old architecture kind of existing together, knowing that a lot of people are relying on React Native for their core business, and they need to not have it be interrupted. So they're putting a lot of work into sort of deprecating things really slowly, and you can turn on the new architecture and still have it be compatible with libraries that are not using the new architecture. Like, there's a lot of stuff built in to make it an easy transition. They're not going to leave anybody out in the desert.
Yeah. It's funny because like I said, I mentioned I did a course on React Native, and this was way back in like 2014 maybe.
Oh wow, that was early days.
Yeah, and it was a bad choice because React Native was changing a lot, and even like Expo was changing a lot. I released the course,
like version 10 or something like that.
It sucked because I put like an 8-hour course out, and then something changed and invalidated the whole thing like a week later. And over the lifetime of that course, I got a lot of, I know this is like early days, a lot of people like mentioning any minor update would break their app completely.
Oh yeah. That was common.
Is it still like that, or has it gotten better?
Not at all. Yeah, I think so we're on version 74 is what just came out.
Wow.
And I would say probably around like 50 or 60, we got to the point where major update, like version updates, were not they didn't break anything. They've really gotten past the point where you're adding new components or like completely changing component APIs. It's really very stable now, and you can see evidence of that with just the number of big enterprise companies that are choosing to use it now that they feel that it's stable and mature.
Man, what about other platforms that React Native can run on? Because like, there's obviously iOS and Android; those are the two supported ones. But I often think both iOS features that are like a little niche. Like I was trying to build like a workout tracker for myself, and I ended up giving up because the watch integration was the best, and I was like, I can't do that with the web. I looked it up. I don't think you can do it with React Native, like Apple Watch. Maybe you tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm curious if there's other platforms that React Native can run on.
There's quite a few now. I mean, obviously none are as supported as iOS and Android and web, but like tvOS is one of the bigger ones that they support. I mean, Mac OS and Windows, you can write apps using React Native.
Like Microsoft has React Native Mac OS and React Native Windows.
It's so ironic to me that Microsoft is the one that maintains React Native Mac OS.
Yeah.
And have you used these before?
Yeah. I've played around with React Native Windows, and we actually internally have an app that we're building using React Native Mac OS. And it's a bit rougher. You have to do a little bit more like spelunking and discovery and research when you get errors and things go wrong. But they're always the React Native team is always really happy when people do stuff with it and tell them about bugs, because then it gets a little bit better every time. But really, the beauty of React Native is that any platform, if someone wants to put in the work, you can target any platform, because it's just an abstraction layer, and what's on the other side is whatever you want it to be. When Apple first announced the Vision Pro, like somebody had a React Native app running in the Vision OS like the next day.
Really?
Like, wow. It really is just if there's someone putting the work in to target a platform, you can do it with React Native.
We had the folks from Raycast on, which is a Mac OS app launcher and productivity app. And in order to build Raycast extensions, it's React, but it's not, you can't use divs, right? It's the same idea, right? They built their own renderer, so you can use node modules and everything you want on the logic side. But once it comes to actually building the interface of the plugin, you have to use their blessed components to build the UI.
Yeah. It's basically like that. I think there's like Fire Stick support, and I don't know about Watch, but yeah, the possibilities are endless.
Trying to get a Fire Stick support on this, that feels like not something I really would love to do. Very much.
That's a show I've been trying to find somebody for a while, and that's all these apps that you install, whether it's on your Google Chromecast or it's on your Samsung TV, they're all built in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and they all work pretty good. Every now and then I'm clicking through mine and I get a little, or it's a little slow to respond to events, and I'm telling my wife like, oh, this thing is, it's blocking. They're blocking the main thread, like she's like, it's fine, just don't click so fast.
Oh man. That's the curse of being a developer is like, when your tech is not working, you're like, oh, I know somebody didn't do this.
Yeah, I know. I know it takes a lot of restraint for me not to go to the feedback and be like,
oh my gosh,
your developers didn't have a timeout, some sort of fix here. I know.
I'm just curious about like talking more about the bridging to native APIs, because every now and then you hit upon something. And often there's like a web API for it. Like I was doing some Bluetooth stuff the other day, and I dove deep into web Bluetooth, but it's not like a standard API. And a lot of these really cool APIs will never work on iOS, So like I'm thinking Bluetooth or NFC, things like that. What happens if there is no bridge for this type of thing? Or what happens if the bridge that you're using to like the camera app or something is not giving you the actual data you need? Do you have to pull up your sleeves and write a little Swift then?
Yeah. I mean, the answer is basically yes. We've had that happen on a couple of our clients. It more often with the ones that are going from a legacy iOS and Android app and trying to recreate the exact experience in React Native. So like there was one on the Mercari app where there was a page that had this like specific like parallax scrolling. Basically, like the image would zoom in a particular way as you scrolled, and it was a very specific little graphical thing. The package, the iOS package that they were using, did not already have a React Native wrapper built by somebody in the community. So the answer was that we had to build it ourselves. So we had to build what's called a config plugin, which is basically we write some JavaScript code and then some Swift code, and it basically just defines this little interface, right? So you'll have the JavaScript side, which is what your React Native app will actually call, use this component or call this method on, and then you'll write some Swift code that basically intercepts those messages and says, okay, when this is called, you're going to do this Swift stuff and you're going to render this iOS component like in the Swift. And so you've just built this like basically communication layer.
Okay. And is it almost like a RPC? Like I know Scott and I have been dipping into Scott, what's the Rust based Electron alternative?
Tori.
I'm blanking. Tori. Tauri, for everyone trying to Google it, where it's like, yeah, you can build desktop apps. It's a little bit different. It's actually the opposite of React Native, where it's your UI is built in HTML and CSS, but your backend is written in Rust.
Oh, interesting.
And you could do mobile apps too, Wes. You could do mobile apps with Tori V2 now. Obviously, it's a web view. It's the Safari web view, but
the way that works is you can define like a hello in Rust, and you can just call it in JavaScript like it's magic. And is it similar to that?
It's basically, I mean, at the end of the day, it's basically the same idea. You're just, you just are defining this layer that says, okay, when I call this thing in JavaScript, I want you to do this thing in native.
Okay. And what about state management? Do you use Redux? Do you use state? Do you have any opinions there?
I have opinions. Yes, I mean, like
let's hear
them. I've used Redux plenty. We have clients that use it. Like I'm comfortable with Redux. Our personal favorite is MobX State Tree, which is
cool.
It's like a more strict version of MobX that has like runtime type safety, and I love it because it makes me feel like my Rails days, like Active Record. It's very object oriented feeling. You have like models that you run functions on, and it'll do async functions and stuff. And then you have properties and stuff. So it's very much like, okay, I have my widget or my user or whatever, and like it has a bunch of properties that I invoke like an object. Yeah, and we just like the feel of it. And then it's all based on the MobX like observer pattern. So your component is basically becomes an observer and then listens to changes in your store or model or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny because now it seems like a lot of the JavaScript frameworks in our world are now going more towards that observable kind of pattern signals and that. But MobX has been doing it for a long time. And not only that, but the people who like MobX, but also MobX State Tree, the people who liked and used that seem to like really go to bat for it for a long time.
We've been using it for 5-6 years. And it's not a super popular library. I mean, like we're kind of the most vocal ones going to bat for it because Redux really dominates the React Native state management space. But we love it. Having used, like we every so often we'll have a project that uses Redux and we'll kind of revisit like where Redux has come and like what it's doing, and we always come back to MobX State Tree. It just feels right.
Yeah. Huh. What are some tools and libraries that you install on most projects? Like besides maybe like Expo, you get up and running. Like what do you need?
So from the developer side, so like looking in my like dev dependencies, We use Jest for testing, just like unit testing. We really love Maestro for end-to-end testing. It actually like runs the app and like does little flows.
Oh yeah, like you could tap on things and
you
swipe
can tell it to like tap on this and like put this text in and hit this button and but it will actually like pull up your device or simulator and do those things. It's very like external to the app. It's not what is it, black box versus white box? Like it doesn't have any knowledge of the internals of your app. It's literally just like as if a user were tapping around.
Yeah. The equivalent to that in our space would be like Cypress or Playwright. Yeah.
So that's actually pretty new to the space that most people until a couple of years ago used Detox, which is more like it has a little bit of knowledge of your application, and it was always really like flaky and kind of brittle, not very much fun to write. And so we've been really liking Maestro recently. And then for like debugging, we have a tool that that Infinite Red builds. We maintain. It's called Reactron, which basically just gives you a window into your app. Like it has a tab for like all the network activity. It has a tab for all of the actions that are happening. So if depending on whether you're using Redux or Mautic State Tree, you'll pick a plugin for your state management system, and it will hook in and listen for the actions that are being called and the state snapshots that are so you can see your state at any given time visually, which is really helpful. And you can actually like run commands and like define custom commands and run them like, oh, hey, reset my entire store, or like navigate to this one debugging page that I always need to go to, or log in with this user, whatever your little debugging workflows are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for auth, you're probably React Native doesn't have cookies, right? It's not the browser. So are you using like JWTs and just sending them along with your requests?
A lot of times, yeah. So depends on what our backend is using. A lot of our clients use like Okta, Auth0, those kinds of auth providers. But basically, most of the time we'll be given a JWT and we store that in secure storage. So like on the device, on iOS, it's the keychain. On Android, it's something else. I can't remember the name of it. But there's a secure place to store things on your device that's associated to your app. And so we'll put the token in there and erase it from like memory. So, and then when the app loads up again, we basically fetch it from secure storage again.
Okay. And that's where you put like environmental variables as well, right? Like I saw people were just downloading React Native apps and finding like tokens for everywhere. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not in there.
There's a lot of misunderstandings about how to keep your mobile app secure. And basically the answer is it's not. So if you have something that is really secret, don't store it in your app. That's the answer. Basically, whenever you can, you should be storing those things on your server and then having your server control access for the app through your user. Anything that the mobile app has access to should be either not secure, like a public token or something that's easily revocable or has a short expiration, like things that will not take your entire system down if it is exposed, because anyone can look in your binary. Like,
they actually follow a Twitter account that just breaks down iOS apps.
Really?
It's really not hard. It's
cool.
Like shockingly easy.
I'll send you the Twitter account later because I don't know it offhand, but they had tweeted out recently they're like I don't know if it was OpenAI or somebody's new app uses Git Sentry, and I was like, oh cool, glad to see it.
Oh man, I guess like even if someone doesn't even crack your application, like if you put like an OpenAI token, that's what everybody was doing.
Oh yeah,
and you're making a request from the device to OpenAI. You can throw Proxy Man on, and it will proxy all of the requests. you can spy on it and see what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't
All right.
don't
Well,
keep
that's
secrets
a
in your
good-
app, please.
That's great. Actually, I got one more question. It's like Facebook is behind so many of these libraries, but does Facebook use any React Native anywhere? Or are they just paying people to maintain it?
They definitely do. I mean, they built it for themselves basically, and then decided to open source it. But there's pages within the Facebook app and like the Instagram app that are React Native. It's definitely not the entire app. It's like little pieces.
And does Apple hate React Native? I remember in the early days, people had a hard time getting their apps approved, but that was a long time
Apple
ago.
doesn't. They don't, because ultimately, at the end of the day, there's no like it's a native app. You wouldn't really be able to tell much difference. Like the code that they're getting submitted is not that different from the code that a native developer would write. So we've never had any problems.
Yeah, as long as you're not like remote updating it. I know they don't like that, right?
They don't like that.
Are you?
We still do it.
Oh,
we
really?
still do
Okay.
it, but they don't like it.
Yeah.
Expo has a system called EAS Updates, which does remote updates, and then App Center, Microsoft App Center, which is actually being sunsetted, was the original. They had their package called Code Push, which does remote updates, and I think they're actually keeping Code Push around. The rest of App Center is getting sunsetted, but yeah, it's been around for a while, and I think they're somehow getting around the App Store because people still use it, but Apple's not a huge fan. I don't think they've found a way to outright ban it though.
Yeah, remember what was the Adobe one, Wes, when they didn't allow Flash on the iPhone, and then Adobe made some sort of like Flash-based iOS app builder.
What was that called?
They banned that,
Adobe
like,
Air.
Yeah, they banned that very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the App Store is always you just have to work around their shenanigans.
Yeah.
Do you have a telephone you can pick up that's connected directly to somebody at Apple? Or
I wish.
Are you not that high up yet? No.
I wish. No, we definitely do not. We have to wait in line like everyone else.
Oh man. All right. Well, we'll have a couple questions for you, Supper Club questions, and I'm actually curious if you use iOS or Android.
Oh, iOS, 100%.
100%. Yeah. Just how come?
Full. I mean, I started with iOS, and I've just always been in that universe, and because I use macOS for work. I just love that everything integrates, and it's the UI is pleasing to me. It's very aesthetic and easy to use, and everything is kind of iOS first and Android second. So everything is supported.
It is very much like that still. Yeah. I was an Android guy for a very long time, but I used Mac for everything else. And at some point I was like, I'm really fighting the system all the time here to get these things to talk to each other. So I bit the bullet.
Yeah. Whenever I try to get I have a bunch of Android devices that I use for development. And anytime I try to get a screenshot from my test device to my computer, it's just like unnecessarily hard. I'm like, why is this so difficult?
The Apple one always breaks on me too. The shared keyboard, I use that every time I post a TikTok video. I write the caption on my computer, I copy it, and then I try paste it on my phone. And it stopped working, and it always stops working.
It is inconsistent. Randomly. Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
I find it's easier for me to do it the other direction.
Yeah, it works the other direction. I can copy on my phone and paste on my Mac, and then you look into it, and it's like, try signing out. Did you reboot your phone? Like, come on.
I hate those. I had one of those yesterday with my AirPods, and it was like, you need to disconnect them and forget them, and then redo the Bluetooth connect. I'm like, that's not going to fix. That's not the problem.
Yeah. I don't know what's more depressing is stumbling upon an Apple forums or a Google forums.
Oh no.
I'd say Apple. The Apple.
I am not going to help. Yeah.
Those are the worst.
The Apple forums are so hopeless.
That's where questions go to die.
Seriously. Yeah. Oh my gosh. What text editor do you use for writing React Native apps?
VS Code is everyone I know who does React Native uses VS Code.
Really?
Maybe there's a couple exceptions, but yeah, it's very, very well integrated and supported, and It's almost at this point, it's like the blessed editor for React Native.
Nice.
Really?
Yeah.
How often do you have to open Xcode?
Once a couple times
Or
a
run
week, maybe.
ADB?
You don't have to open it to do builds. Excepting maybe once in a while. It's rare, which is good because it eats up my RAM.
Yeah, it's a hog.
it's
We
a
had Jen
beast.
Simmons on, and she gave us a tip that you can install Xcode, install the simulators, which is almost what we need. It's just a web development simulator, and then you can
Xcode.
uninstall. I didn't even know you could do that. It's like 400 gigs or something like that.
Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah, there are times when you need it, but it's few and far between.
All right, let's move into the last section that we have here, which is sick picks and shameless plugs. Did you come prepared with a sick
I
pick?
did. I did my homework.
Awesome, good. Most people do not. They're like, what the hell is a sick pick?
Believe me, if there's anything I can read beforehand to prepare for things, believe I've read it. My sick pick is for awesome socks, which if your audience is pretty nerdy, they may already know about awesome socks. It's this service started by Hank and John Green. And a subscription service for socks. It's exactly what it sounds like.
This is very funny.
Are you trolling me right now?
This is
No.
great given
oh
current
my gosh,
context.
You have to tell the story.
This is great.
You're not trolling me right now.
I am not.
Okay, so let me tell the story. So on Saturday, I bought 75 pairs of white socks, all exactly the same, and I tweeted out, like just getting one kind of sock and that's it is the best like life hack ever. It's like such a life improvement, and the tweet blew up. 9 million impressions
People had
on it.
Opinions.
Yeah.
So many opinions. Hank Green
No.
quote tweets it. It says, I strongly disagree or whatever. And then the next day he sends me a DM and says, hey, you want 30 pairs of different socks? Because he has this like company that makes awesome socks.
Yes.
And
They are awesome,
All
to
the
be
money
fair.
goes towards, what is it? Good.store. All
yeah,
of the
all
money
their money
goes towards
to charity.
Yeah.
The socks
that's
are very,
hilarious.
very nice. They're very comfortable, and it's a little surprise in your mailbox every month. I love it. That is so
Robin,
funny,
thank you
though.
for
I
this
swear
moment.
I wasn't trolling you.
Yes,
turned
thank
them
you.
down.
This was such a great moment because of just we were just talking
the timing.
about it's so incredibly perfect. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
I
tweeted that like an hour ago, but right before you came on. That's hilarious.
Oh my gosh, no way. Because I follow
Yeah.
you on Twitter, so I was like, I can't believe I missed this. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was just this morning.
I'll throw the link in
Oh,
the show
that's
notes and in
funny.
the chat for everybody.
That's so
funny.
fun.
That's great. Oh man, I thought for sure you were trolling me.
No.
That's great.
That's funny.
What about shameless plug? What would you like
Shameless
to plug?
plug. I'll stick a couple in here if you're giving me the mic.
Yes.
So first of all, my company, Infinite.Red, if you're looking for React Native work, we would love to talk to you. Also, we host, every year we host Chain React, which is our React Native conference. It's the only one based in the US. So it's in Portland, July 17th through the 19th. You can get tickets now, and if you use the discount code Syntax, you can get 10% off.
Ooh. Sorry, how much?
10% off.
10% awesome. Sorry, I oohed over your.
I know, me
over
too.
you.
Same.
So that's July 17th through the 19th in Portland. We'd love to hang out with you.
Amazing.
And of course, React Native Radio.
Oh yes, and how could I forget? And yes, React Native Radio, wherever you get your podcasts, check us out. Subscribe if you please. We release episodes usually once a week. We talk about everything React Native. So yeah, give us a listen.
It's wild to me that, you 300 episodes on just React Native. Like Scott and I talk about everything web development, back end, front end, and whatnot. And that's very impressive that you can do so much content on it. But it just goes to show how deep native apps is and how it's literally its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one little quick thing before we go. I was really impressed by your .red top level domain.
Yeah, that's
I'm pretty sure our founder went and like as soon as .red became an available domain, he like went in and snatched it up.
Yeah. So here's a question for both of you. How many color-based TLDs do you think exist?
Oh, a little bit of stumped.
Yes.
How many color-based TLDs?
I mean, how many colors are there?
I know the color.
I say 4. There's definitely a .black.
There is a .black.
Dot blue? I would
There's
guess
a dot
there's
blue.
a dot blue.
There's a
Green.
.red.
Oh,
Dot
there's got to
red.
be dot green.
Dot green.
No. Really?
Oh,
Yeah, there
like
is.
anything eco, like
Yeah.
environmental.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Okay.
You're right. Yeah.
So here are some odd ones that you might not expect. There's only 7, okay? But out of those 7, one of them is .navy. One of them is
Navy makes sense.
Navy makes
'cause it's
sense. Does the Navy
But-
use .navy?
I think
They
it's
probably
for
own it.
color specifically. There's a .gold. There's
Okay.
a .pink. So you guys got all of them except for gold, navy, and pink. So
Wait, we got more colors than just red?
So there's black, blue, gold, green, navy, pink, and red. No, not infinite red. I'm
Okay.
saying just in general.
Oh, yeah.
Just now. Those are kind of that's kind of odd choices to me.
That's
I
a lot
get
of
many of
colors.
them, but yeah, there's no .yellow. There's no .orange.
Yeah, why some
No
colors but
purple.
not others? Are
Yeah.
they going to add yellow at some point?
You got
Yeah,
it's expensive to yeah, we have a whole show on how to get your own TLD. So it's not owned by the government, but it is intentionally meant to target government
Interesting.
navies, which is like, how many countries have a navy?
US.navy,
Top level domains.
Canada.navy.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Canada.navy.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Robin. This has been a blast.
Oh, yes.
I
Thank
really
you so much
enjoyed
for
it.
having me.
Wicked. All right. Thanks again.
Yep.